Why are you heading off for a morning of worship? And you're dealing with...
So it wasn't a religiously affiliated shelter then, or?
Yes and no. Mitch Snyder had been in prison with the Berrigans,
Okay.
and who were Catholic priests in upstate New York. They'd done some direct action, civil disobedience. And so Mitch Snyder got to have somewhat of a spiritual experience during his incarceration.
Oh.
And so there were definitely Christian themes and principles that were at work at the shelter. Our Christmas theme when I was there for that winter was there's still no room at the inn. And so our theme at a Christmas party on the mall, and Cher and half of the Washington Redskins showed up, and what's her name from Married with Children?
Katie Sagal.
Katie Sagal was there. I got to meet Katie.
Notice how fast I rattled that off? Yeah, I used to watch TV, Fox 29.
Yeah. Back when we had four channels.
Yeah.
Just really quick, would you mind moving the water bottle?
No
Either,
problem.
Like in front of the microphone or on the floor or something.
Yeah.
I want to make sure people see your face.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Are
you.
we rolling here?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Or is this better over here?
That's fine too.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're talking about, with Pastor Mark Olson here, his experience working in a homeless shelter in Washington, D.C. And the story so far is that Mark was in college at Concordia in Augsburg, and then out of the blue kind of decided to work in a homeless shelter in Washington, D.C. for a year.
Yeah, I was a senior in college. I had bounced back and forth between Concordia and Augsburg, and it was my senior year. Fall of my senior year, I met a girl that I really liked. She broke up with me. I didn't like my classes, and I always kind of had this dream of, this is the '80s, and of hitchhiking around the United States.
Sure.
and meeting folks and. There was a symposium at Concordia College on homelessness, and Reverend John Steinbrook was a Lutheran pastor who was on the speakers list, and then Mitch Snyder, who was an activist at the Community for Creative Nonviolence.
Okay.
In D.C. And at one point in the symposium, Mitch Snyder kind of looked out at the crowd of us, pasty white Lutherans sitting around, dressed all the same in our leather jackets and our, whatever was in fashion back in the 80s. And he said, look at this. You guys are all the same. Come work in my shelter. Come see a different side of God's community.
Yeah.
It's dangerous to always be surrounded by like-minded people. And again, with my girlfriend breaking up with me and other just sort of personal turmoil and not really sure what I wanted to do next, I left my dad a note. We've got a tree farm in Wisconsin, drove down there, left our vehicle down there, and then I hitchhiked. Actually, I went down to Florida first, and just I wanted to see the shuttle go off. So I and then when I only had $20 left in my boot,
You hitchhiked down to Florida.
Yeah. I took Mitch Snyder up on his offer of free room and board in his shelter of 2,200 people.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of a fellow by the name of John Grisham?
Yeah, the author?
The author,
Sure.
the attorney?
Yeah.
His book, The Street Lawyer, tells the story of the CCNV shelter, one of his many books about law and drama. And, and true to the book, a lot of the lawyers that I worked with during my year there were folks who were doing pro bono work on behalf of the homeless.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you got to tell us about your hitchhiking technique and if you had any kind of funny stories that came out of that.
I mean, there was some really interesting folks. I mean, I really enjoyed.
Did you do it by yourself or
by myself.
Yeah.
My first night out, I was in Fall Creek, Wisconsin. And I got picked up by a beekeeper, and he we stayed in his
apiary or
a
beekeeper.
He needed it was the end of the season. It was November, and he wanted me to help him load some of those big white pallets of bee stuff, and he had a flatbed truck, and we drove around, and I stayed with him and his family that night. We
He just said, "Come on in."
come on, and
Yeah, it's a different time.
Oh yeah, and he had worked on tramp steamers. He hitchhiked
Yeah.
all over the world. He had hitchhiked all the way around Australia, and so he gave me all sorts of pointers.
Okay, so what were some of the
Yeah,
points?
he said, keep yourself clean, keep moving, don't sit down.
Yeah.
People are much more likely to pick you up if you're, if your backpack is on your back and you
Right.
have this sort of sense of, if you give me a ride, great.
Yeah.
But if not, I'm going to get where I'm going to go.
And like a nonchalance about it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then just people who who have fallen on hard times, who have a background of poverty, are so much more willing to pick a hitchhiker up. I mean, it was just really interesting. Or people, I wouldn't say, there were some, like the beekeeper guy who had in their previous lives
Been
hitchhikers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's 35 years ago now.
Yeah, so they knew they weren't kind of inherently dangerous
Yeah.
people and everything. Because I don't see it at all these
No,
days.
no,
You just
yeah.
don't see it.
And on the res, working back when I was in Leech Lake and now in White Earth, every once in a while you see a hitchhiker and you pick them up. And again, that always opens the door to interesting conversations.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, now, at the time that you were hitchhiking to D.C., had you already been called to service as a pastor, or where were you in that whole journey?
There was certainly some discernment in that direction.
Okay.
But it was really, I didn't want to just kind of do conventional ministry. And my dad, who's Roger Olson, who's
Sure.
served here. This is my hometown, Park Rapids, baptized here in 1966. He always said,
At Calvary there?
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
Uh-huh.
He said, do it your own way. If you're gonna go into ministry, and so a lot of my ministry has been ministry on the margins, working with intercultural communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you're ordained as a minister in ELCA,
Correct.
Is that okay?
Yep.
So that ultimately you did complete your education and got that taken care of.
I did a lot of journaling when I traveled and when I was working with the homeless in D.C. And I'd actually when I was at Augsburg, spent some time at our Savior's Lutheran shelter in South Minneapolis.
Yeah, I saw that on here too. So.
Drawn to that. So when I'm traveling out into to D.C., I had Thomas Merton is a Trappist monk who had in his approach to the gospel of Jesus Christ, still a real commitment to social justice. I was reading him while I was living in the staff area in the shelter.
Sure. Yeah. So was it part? I mean, you said that the shelter was not necessarily religiously affiliated, but I mean, so it wasn't. You weren't doing missionary work at that point.
No.
Okay.
It was 100% full on ministry to the homeless. We'd serve a meal. The CCNV shelter is a 2,500 bed shelter with a medical infirmary. It was a place where, in the morning we'd have guys go out with a work hat, a hard hat under their arm. But the shelter provided an address. There was along with sleeping areas, there was again the infirmary. There was a small women's shelter. Back in the 80s, back in the 80s, there was a significant veteran, World War II veterans, and still are, because of the trauma of post-traumatic stress, a lot of our homeless folks are dealing with PTSD
And it was kind of, I guess, you're talking about the 80s. It's probably like the height of the crack epidemic too, right? I mean, so there's probably a lot of drugs and stuff, and probably DC's may not have been the most safe place to be at that point in time.
Boy, it was sure interesting though.
Yeah.
I mean, along with the work that we did during the day, making a meal for folks. In the evening, I drove the CCNV, and again the pro bono lawyers that worked with them, kind of in that, in the sense of what the street lawyer conveys. We had a temporary injunction against the District of Columbia, where they had to provide temporary shelter during the winter months.
Oh.
And so I would drive a 15 passenger van through the city at night and transport as many as 100 or more homeless people to those emergency shelters.
So you'd be picking them up and bringing them to the shelter.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I mean, it's a lot of people hear that and say, "Wow, that sounds like it would have been a kind of a dangerous type of thing to do," right?
You know, I've never felt afraid. You know, I carried.
You're the only person there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I carried a pack of cigarettes on the cowling. You know, in those vans. You know, they got that kind of cowling there, and you know,
they have problem just give somebody a smoke and that would
yeah,
calm them
you know,
down.
and just come out and I remember these Navy veterans in their blue pea coats, just you know, around a fire barrel and just caked with ash from the fire, and it was a cold night.
Sure.
And after a while, you just develop a relationship with them, and I'd like to go somewhere warm tonight, thanks.
Yeah. What is it about the homeless or the poverty stricken that attracts you as part of your ministry?
Well, everybody's interesting. Everybody, if you listen to their story long enough, I remember one night I was serving an interim in Park River, North Dakota, and we went to the mission in Grand Forks and served a meal that night. And then as the kids were cleaning up the meal, here was a homeless guy with an old chess piece. He pulled this chess piece and he asked, anybody want to play chess tonight? And all the residents are like, "No, man, you've beat me enough times." And I'm like, "I'll give it a shot." So we sat down at that table, this homeless man and I, and neat, interesting character. And for the next half hour, you know, the kids are done cleaning in the kitchen, and they're coming out, and it's the two of us, man against man, on this table, and where they'd serve the meal. Playing chess against each other, and I mean, kids in my youth group are cheering for the homeless guy. They're not cheering for me. But it was and eventually he did beat me. But you know, and just in sitting at that table and listening, getting to know him, listening to his story, spending time with the other. God has created us uniquely wonderful. Yeah, mental illness is a huge issue amongst our homeless population, and the pandemic certainly hasn't helped that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the root causes of homelessness, I mean, it's sort of like a whack-a-mole type of thing, right? So you could say mental health, you could say drugs, you could say lots of different things, right? But they must all have, I mean, there's the commonality that they have is that they don't have a place to live. They don't have a shelter at the time. And like you said, everybody's different and everybody's got a different story and a different reason for being there.
Yeah, a person that could provide lots of insight in our area is Pastor Brigida Simpson. She's the mission developer for People's Church in Bemidji. Yeah. And we're dealing with the same issues there. Back in 2017, when I was still serving in Leech Lake, Sandy Henham ran the family shelter in Bemidji, and we were working on some advocacy together. And I remember Sandy saying to me, and this is 2016, 2017, that over the course of a calendar year in Bemidji, they have over 800 unduplicated women and children that go to their shelter, and they can't find a place for them that night. Just up here in Bemidji. Over 800 that's different. Yeah, different, right? Different women and children that at least one night in Bemidji aren't able to find a place to lay their head.
So you say just maybe for one night, maybe somebody, had a break or something, and it's just that, we're out on the street, we got to get something taken care of. I mean, or else there's probably some long-term situations there too, right? Yeah, everything can be different. So, how would you go about addressing this issue of homelessness in our area?
Well, I think nobody wants to spend a night out alone, and I think we look at what's happening in Moorhead with the Churches United. And
what is that? I'm not sure.
Churches United for the homeless, or Churches United is it is a homeless shelter that also has apartments, and they address homelessness and the need for housing on a more comprehensive level.
Okay. So building more housing is
Yeah.
part of it, or affordable housing,
Sure.
or free housing, or
Yeah.
whatever.
And a lot of our homeless folks still work. Brigida up at People's Church would say a lot. There are people that come there for the meal. They're staying in their cars.
Yeah.
They come and they come for the evening meal, and then they go back to their vehicles. Lots of folks are doubled up. They're living with, at least for as long as they can, and sometimes tenable and sometimes untenable situations where, they're sleeping on a couch.
So, as a pastor, what's your approach in terms of spiritually ministering to the homeless as opposed to, like, say, some other group?
Well, I don't know that there's a spiritual dimension, but sometimes it's just simply finding connections with other providers, developing a network of connections through mental health, sometimes through the emergency room at the hospital, providing follow-up and helping to make those connections. Yeah.
So meeting physical and mental health needs as sort of a baseline thing that has to be done, and then potentially moving on from there if the timing is right and you have the opportunity, right? I suppose. Yeah. All right. So you said you had been a pastor, I guess, at a interim pastor, and I think you'd been a pastor at a church as well. I mean, in your experience.
Sure.
But now I have it is that you are the White Earth Church and Community Developer.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a shared position between the Episcopal Church
in
Minnesota and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Northwest Minnesota Synod.
Okay.
And we are working to develop a place of study, theological education, spiritual development, both for Native and non-Native people. The churches of White Earth, and there's 4 of them.
Yep.
One is very, very near here, Breck Memorial in Pine Point.
Okay.
Pine Point, Ponsford area, St. Columba in White Earth, and Samuel Memorial in Natowash or Natawash, depending upon who you talk to. And then St. Philip's in Rice Lake, which is up more towards Bagley.
Yeah.
Those are our 4 communities. So my work on Sunday mornings, in terms of leading worship, that's my plant foot. And then the other 3 Sundays of the month, I'm out developing ministry connections in both Episcopal and Lutheran churches. So last Sunday I was in Black Duck and Kelliher. This Sunday I'm going to be at St. Luke's Episcopal in Detroit Lakes. And what we're basically doing is trying to find networks and connections. Calvary Lutheran here in Park Rapids and Breck Memorial in Pine Point have a geographic connection. And so doing one-to-ones with folks up in Pine Point and here in Park Rapids. And at this point, doing just a lot of listening, Zach, and finding where ministry might emerge.
Okay, so let's back up a step here. So you mentioned White Earth. So, for people who maybe aren't from the area that don't know what that is, what is White Earth?
Well, the White Earth Reservation was formed in the 1860s. If you're traveling down, and was really one of the first models of reservations as the government tried to create places for Native communities. There's this misnomer that our Native communities were defeated or conquered. In fact, the government entered into treaties with federally recognized tribes. And the formation of White Earth is a part of those treaty rights that were recognized at the time. And if you're down in the Brainerd, Gull Lake area, you'll see St. Columba Mission or a Hole-in-the-Day Lake. And that's or Pillager, Minnesota, where the Pillager tribe was. That's where some of those different communities were moved or relocated to the White Earth Reservation.
Oh, okay. So those communities, so the people who ended up in White Earth were originally from those communities.
Yeah.
Okay.
So St. Columba Episcopal Church in the village of White Earth is the fourth Episcopal Church formed in the state of Minnesota. And it was initially formed in that Gull Lake area and moved and transitioned here 150 years ago.
Move with the people.
Yeah.
So, okay, you said federally recognized tribe, and we're talking about the Ojibwe, or what is the I know there's different terminology and all that. Yeah.
I think there's there's 7 Ojibwe tribes in Minnesota and 3 Dakota.
Yeah.
So you've got Mille Lacs, you've got Net Lake, you've got White Earth, Red Lake.
There's
Leech
Bois
Lake.
Fort too, or is that
Bois Fort and Fond du Lac.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And those are all just different bands of the tribe of the Ojibwe tribe. And
Correct.
Speaking a common language and common culture, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, there's, as you get into Wisconsin, there's Le Cordelier, there's Red Cliff, there's a number of other Chippewa or Ojibwe, Anishinaabe tribes.
So those are all interchangeable terms, Chippewa, Anishinaabe, and Ojibwe?
And it depends upon who you're talking to. There's preferred, as I've heard it, that as you get east of the Mississippi, Chippewa is still used more. As you get west of the Mississippi, you hear more Ojibwe or Anishinaabe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So White Earth was formed in 1860, did you say, or something?
Yeah, and I don't have the exact date on the top of my head, but yeah. 1860s.
Okay, and then you have Red Lake, obviously, which is another Anishinaabe tribe or reservation that's close by.
Yeah.
But your focus is only on White Earth for at least for the time being.
And that's again for 150 years both White Earth, Red Lake, Leech Lake, Episcopal congregations have been served by native deacons and priests.
Yeah.
We're at a point right now that within a generation, if we don't redevelop and rediscover spiritual formation and training programs, that could end.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you said there were 4 churches within the White Earth reservation.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Is this 4 and only 4, or 4 that come under your jurisdiction?
The 4 Episcopal churches on White Earth are intact. There's 2 churches up in Red Lake. There's 2 over in Leech Lake. And others throughout the state of Minnesota.
Episcopal churches.
Correct.
Now we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Reverend Robert Tubal's the director of Indian work for the Episcopal Church. He's sort of the director of those congregations.
All right.
Yeah.
And then, so in your position, church and community developer, you said that on Sunday mornings you are preaching, or you're not?
Yeah, virtually every Sunday morning I'm in a congregation, either Episcopal or Lutheran.
Okay.
And my job right now as a faith-based community developer is just to, at least amongst this first 6 months, is to listen, to develop relationships. Mm-hmm. If you look at that little form there, it's basically, for those that are watching, it's a series of a bullseye with a series of 3 circles. There's the larger faith community, then there's members of the congregation, and then eventually in the center is what will form into a steering committee. I guess one way could look at it as a board of directors, or kind of a formative group that will give direction to the ministry as it unfolds. At least for now, though, Zach, my first 6 months are deep listening, attending to others' stories and their wants and their needs, rather than coming in and imposing what I think we should do. Rather, listen from the field for the field. What are folks longing for in terms of spiritual development and formation? So
what is then the mission?
The mission is, I think, to develop a house of studies, a gathering place, intercultural, ecumenical place of study and learning. Intercultural, where we're learning how to relate the faith from a place of diversity. I like the language. What is the gospel according to White Earth? How is Jesus' message embodied in the context and the text of the scriptures? How is it lived out in community?
So you're taking these 4 churches and you are improving them or developing them or making them stronger and resilient and able to last? Because you mentioned something about how if we don't do this kind of thing, these churches may go away, right? Or
I would say instead of you, I'd say y'all.
Okay.
In that sense of is a kind of a right now in terms of this whole faith-based community development is from a place of faith. What is the community that is mutually discerned? Here's another way of putting it.
Yeah.
In our Lutheran Church, we've denounced the doctrine of discovery. We have land acknowledgments. We've done all sorts of things to say, and rightfully so. There are some things in our history of colonialism that we regret. And after saying you're sorry, what do? Do you just kind of go back to a place of privilege? Do we go back to Park Rapids or Bagley or Detroit Lakes or Monoman and just sort of carry on in our own?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wondered about that sort of thing, because when I go to the Bemidji State hockey game and they do a land acknowledgement at the beginning, they read that off and everybody listens to it, and it's like, okay, well, sometimes I have the thought, well, if this is a tribal land, then why don't you just give it back? That kind of thing, right? Yeah. So I mean, I understand that the importance of those types of sentiments probably to the communities to have that, at least that acknowledgement, right? But now you're getting into taking action.
Yeah, and then so now that we've the height of white privilege or white fragility, if you will, is then that was really awkward, that was painful, we've said we're sorry, now we'll just simply go back to the systems and where we're comfortable.
Okay.
I think a lot of my work and our collective work is to say, how do we want to embody the gospel together? What happens after we say we're sorry? What do we do after we acknowledge the history of colonialism that we're on stolen land? Okay, where does that go? What does faith look like next? And that's something I've met with both traditional and Christian spiritual leaders. Roman Catholic, Episcopal, Lutherans, and saying, hey, what does the future look like? And how do we train leaders for specifically that kind of work?
Right.
A lot of my job is to work myself out of a job. I've got 8 to 10 years before retirement, and then I want to drive school bus.
Okay.
I don't want to be one of these pastors that preaches and does interim ministry for years. Yeah. I want to still be around kids. But in the point of time is handing the keys over to Indigenous leaders who can live and shape understanding what it means to be followers of Jesus Christ 30 years from now, not just 3 years from now or 10 years from now, but to really build a sustainable ministry.
So when you're talking about living the gospel of Jesus Christ, what is that to you?
Love for the neighbor, a sense of grace. God, because of sin, sent Jesus to justify us. Are the first 4 articles of our Augsburg Confession, and that the message of Jesus Christ and the justification of broken people, being made right with God, and justice and justification hold together. When I was in Bagley, we did a study of all sorts of, it was mapping systemic racism in rural America. And we did a study of incarceration rate, access to health care, amount of money spent on health care, access to food. Some of our hugest food deserts are in our reservation communities where folks are separated from a corner grocery store or whatever. Access to health care, arrest rate, which as a lawyer you may know, arrest rate isn't always even between different cultures. There's a saying,
arrest rate. Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. So all of these different factors, life expectancy,
right,
and in a synopsis, paragraph that compares the statistics. The chance that native and non-native populations would be so disparate is 6 billion to 1 by chance. That one population
statistically you couldn't justify making that argument.
Reproducing that is a chance of 6 billion to 1.
Right.
That, and I'm on the school board in Bagley. I'm the Indian Ed liaison to our parent and Indian committees. And how do we create or close the academic achievement gaps or opportunity gaps for young people? That's particularly interesting to me as somebody who wants to do spiritual development and training future deacons and priests. If that young person is not reading at grade level in the second grade, and their opportunity, and we know that if you're not reading at grade level by the second grade, your opportunity to graduate from high school is dramatically reduced.
Sure.
So that future priest or deacon or leader in the Episcopal or Lutheran Church who's in that community of Bagley or Rice Lake or Pine Point, we've got to find ways to close that gap.
Yeah. So they have the basic skills and abilities that they need to be able to succeed in today's world, right?
To read, to write, to raise a family,
Yeah.
To ascend to whatever future goal that they would aspire to.
Yeah.
Hopefully some to ministry.
Yeah. And any kind of injustice is obviously an affront to God's holiness.
Yeah. Anton Troyer, who's a professor of Ojibwe at Bemidji State University at the time of George Floyd, and when we realized, because of the murder of George Floyd, just how large the achievement gaps are between people of color and white folks in Minnesota. I remember I was at one of Anton Troyer's presentations, and he said, "Hey, nobody wins when you play the oppression Olympics." But some of the biggest gaps in Minnesota, as stark and as real as how we're realizing with the murder of George Floyd, just how real those are in the Twin Cities. Some of those gaps are even wider between our native and non-native populations.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess what I'm trying to relate it back to is, the fact that injustice or oppression of other people is sin.
Yeah, it's brokenness. It's brokenness on a systemic level.
Right.
So
there can be a systemic sin.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's really hard to unring that bell.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, because the system is made up of individual components, and some of them, may not have any, not have any bad intentions or anything like that, right? Yeah. So, in a sense, that's let's say you've got like a nuclear bomb or something, and then there's a screw in it or something. Well, the screw is not the bomb itself, right? But all the pieces together make up something terrible. So how do you address something like that from a spiritual standpoint?
I think you find on-ramps. I think you find access points. You build relationships between, a church like Calvary here in Park Rapids, and a church like Breck Memorial and Pine Point.
Yeah.
They
have to want to they have to want to reject that, right? A person who comes to faith in Jesus Christ wouldn't be the person who would say, I love sin, right? Or I love oppressing others, or I love injustice, right? Whereas, a person who doesn't have that relationship might say something to the effect that, well, I'll just do whatever advantages me, because there ultimately would be no repercussion for that.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is tracking or not with what you're saying, but we live in an attitude of, I really love my church and I love my faith community, and if folks would just come to our church, right, they would we'd be so welcoming to them. In our reservation communities, banks and school districts and wonderful Pine Point School is wonderful and does some great work and has a history of having indigenous teachers there. But buses and jobs and that tend to float towards Park Rapids.
Mm-hmm.
And the thought and the intention of somebody that says, "Oh, I really like my white Lutheran church,"
Yeah.
saying, but I'm going to step away from that and drive 15, 20 miles to the reservation.
Mm-hmm.
You can live your whole life in Park Rapids
Yeah.
and never have to step foot in Pine Point.
True.
You
Right.
live your whole life in Pine Point, and you're going to, on a weekly basis,
You'll be here.
likely have to come to Park Rapids.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So spiritually, what does it mean to move in the opposite direction? And to attend to the other.
So it kind of comes back to this idea of like missionary type work. If you're coming from within the church, it's fine to say, "Hey, everybody come here and be a part of our fellowship," but it's another thing to actually go out, as it says in Mark or, whatever, go ye forth into the world. And, so is it that kind of an idea that maybe there ought to be more movement in the other direction to try to, bring people into a fold rather than just kind of, saying that, well, we've got this nice church here, why don't they just come here, right?
Well, I think the model of missionary work would probably be rejected, and for good reason. But accompaniment, being in relationship with, the gospel of Jesus Christ is strong and resilient in our reservation communities. The question that the Episcopal Church and the Lutheran Church, has to continue to ask, and I'm kind of paraphrasing Butch Smith, the senior warden at Pine Point. He said, "The question is, do the Episcopalians or Lutherans want to come and hear what Jesus is up to on
right.
white earth?"
Yeah.
And so it's not so much an imposition of one faith system or understanding over against another. It's how do we listen to one another?
Mm-hmm. And achieve some sort of commonality or something like that.
Yeah, and shared vision.
Mm-hmm.
I have, and nothing against the Episcopal Church or the Lutheran Church, but the model of which we've been doing church over the last 150 years is changing, and I think what we can create together and develop in a community like White Earth is going to be radically different, and I think substantially more wholesome and holistic than sort of the silo understanding. Well, I'm a Lutheran, or
is there any need to hang on to those denominational, I guess, they're just names, right? I mean, you said before, like they're, we're kind of getting away from that, but I mean, why even call it that, right? I mean, you say this is the Episcopal Church or this is the Lutheran Church. I mean, it sounds like what you're trying to do is something that sort of transcends those labels.
I think what that'll look like 30 years from now, Zach, I don't know, but I'm really hopeful.
Yeah.
That it'll be something remarkably different than a particularly Scandinavian white Lutheran expression of Christianity. We're the whitest denomination this side of the Mormons. And I'm nothing against that history and that identity, but the Sven and Ole jokes can only go so far. And who we are together. I think I'm amazed at the resilient faith of my Native neighbors. 25 years ago, when I was the senior pastor at Hope Lutheran in Walker, we started ministry alongside St. John's in Onigam, another Episcopal congregation. And every time I went out there, just left more of my heart there.
What is it about their faith that is so impressive to you?
Well, at a time of death, at the time of the loss of loved ones, lighting a spirit fire outside of that community center and receiving the body of that loved one or going with the family to the home. And then the 2-night wakes where the Ojibwe singers come and or the drum comes and provides the traveling song for those who follow more of a traditional spiritual practice. Hand-dug graves where the loved one's body is lowered into the ground, and the pallbearers stay around and bury the body themselves. Is my experience in Lutheran churches is, we say, the committal service, and then we leave, and the vault truck takes care of the rest, and we go back to the church and
have a luncheon.
Have a little luncheon, potato salad. As the body has been lowered, and a nephew goes down and nails the plywood box closed, and we walk in the direction of the sun around the grave and place dirt and tobacco with a loved one. I mean, there's so many things about wakes and funerals and burial services in our Ojibwe community that are so real and so authentic, and there's no hurry.
So the parallel, the saying about, like the whitewashed tomb, right? It looks great on the outside and everything is wonderful there, but on the inside, maybe there isn't as much substance there. Whereas it sounds like you're describing, as opposed to sort of just like this more sterile funeral service that we would have at a Lutheran church, to be something that's a little bit more meaningful or deep.
And maybe it's just me experiencing something that's different. I've hundreds of funerals that I've been at, there's just. Well, let me tell you a story. I'm doing a funeral in Onagum for a young person who some of the Walker teachers knew had been a student, and I can't remember the cause of death. It could have been suicide. It could have been an overdose. Anyway, it was a tragic young death. Funeral was on a Saturday. There were some loved ones that we were hoping to get out of a county jail. And so we waited and delayed, and we're hoping that they could be released and come to the service. As we're waiting for that process, I'd gone to the teachers and had a printed out copy of 23rd Psalm or something, and asked if they'd be willing to read it during the service. And the service gets delayed a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And when we finally began the service, I looked back and those teachers were gone. And I went back to where they were sitting, and there was the reading of the 23rd Psalm sitting on their chair. They simply ran out of time. They had something else that evidently was more powerful or more needful than grieving that former student. I tell people, when you go to Pine Point or when you go to White Earth, or leave your watch at home, and move at the speed of relationships. Move at the speed of the time of others.
Different pace delay.
And sometimes, doggone it, just a healthier pace. This is kind of a funny story. I started my ministry in Leech Lake back in 2013, full time. I was then the priest in charge of the churches in Onagum and Cass Lake. And within my first year there, because you've got a wake here, you got a funeral, or you've got to meet with a family here or there, I got pulled over for speeding 5 times. 5 times. The last time, the highway patrol woman pulled me over, and she said, "Oh, Mark, it's you again." You don't know when you're on a first name with highway.
Yeah, well, you're almost at the point where they'd be looking at your license, right? Yeah.
And it took me that long to realize that it didn't matter if I got there on time. It was, the ministry was already waiting for me on God's time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's no real need to hurry if you're, if it's a different way to approach the concept of time, right?
And I'd say to you, Zach, because of that transformation of Mark Olson that occurred, that attentiveness to relationship and taking time for each other healed me. And that before that I was kind of a high-powered senior pastor where you got these boards and these committees and these obligations and these things to tend to, these agendas, and that was a real healing experience.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to change subjects here.
Sure.
If we could, just about generally speaking, growing up in Park Rapids. What are, because this is after all, a local podcast, we're talking about the area.
Yeah,
so what are some of your favorite memories growing up?
Well, so I was 4 years old when my dad took the call to Christ the King Lutheran in Moorhead. He'd served here at Calvary from 63 to 70.
Okay.
So I was just a young guy. And when we began ministry at Christ the King in Moorhead, there were more kids in our Sunday school at Christ the King than any one of the public elementary schools, which is busting with kids.
Yeah.
The south side of Moorhead were kind of the growing edge of a, community of young people. And when I started kindergarten, my mom went back to teach. She's a public school teacher. And I remember the revolutionary conversation that now that my parents were two income, Roger, do you think we can really afford that lake cabin back in Park Rapids? $24,000. Do you think we can do it? So, sure enough, on Long Lake, my folks bought a lake cabin.
Yeah.
And it was about 5th grade at the time.
Sure.
And Mom, being a school teacher, my summers were spent often with her. We'd stop at the Holly Bakery or the Lake Park Drive-In.
On the way,
On the way, we'd get some goodies. And then it was, it'd be hot in Fargo-Moorhead. And you'd just get to the lake cabin. It was like 10, 15 degrees cooler when you got down by the water.
Yeah.
Kissing Cousins Candy Store and parking in the middle of Main Street. All of that was just a big part of my childhood. And then high school, it was going to the drive-in.
Sure. Yeah. What did you like when you got there when you were a kid? What was like one of the first things that you do when you get out of the car and go to the cabin?
Well, there was no... There was no cell phones. It was you swam in the lake or you fished off the dock or there was a place where we would knew where we could fish for rainbow trout. And so we'd catch these beautiful rainbows, and Jerry Fuller, we'd go put the trout.
Fuller's bait shop there.
Fuller's bait shop, and put the so proud that we had these nice trout, and so unique in the midst of the bass or the northern or the walleye that were
you don't hear
there.
about that. Rainbow trout. That must be right where a river comes in or something.
I can't.
You can't.
No name lake.
Oh yeah, area
lake.
lake or whatever they say, right? Yeah. Do you still fish a lot or?
Yeah. Actually, when my wife and I I was serving Grace Lutheran in Detroit Lakes. This is before kids. We were living in a parsonage, and we thought, oh gosh, we gotta, start looking at building some equity. And so we bought 230 acres south of town here, right where the Strait and Fishhook rivers come.
Oh, okay.
Sold half of that to kind of pay off the other 100 acres that we kept. So if you kind of know where Highway 87 starts to turn south towards to Hubbard.
Yeah.
Crosses the Fishhook River. That's our property there.
Oh, okay.
The other way I like to describe it, where the RDO plant is there on Highway 71. When the wind is from the northwest, I smell French fries in my deer stand.
Okay, so that's your hunting property there too. Yeah, I was going to ask you because I know you're a big deer hunter.
And it's really good family time. So I built a little cabin back there. Fished a little bit in the Strait and Fishhook there, and
you do a little fly fishing then too, I suppose. Right?
Yeah, I'm a novice fly fisher, and when you're in all of those buffalo grass and trees, and there's just a limit. So I have to be honest. Most of the fishing I do down there is with spinning gear.
It's hard. I mean, I'm just told that the Strait River is supposed to be one of the best.
For sure. And early season, the wood ducks are flying down there. And,
oh, okay. Yeah. So you get out after those two then?
We had to put our lab down this fall, but it was such a joy to go down there. And,
you think you'll get another one?
Well, we're right now we're still living in Bagley, and eventually would love to move to the Park Rapids area.
Yeah.
That's sort of the dream, but I accepted this position, the White Earth position, September 15th, and to pack up everything before the snow flies. We're going to stay in Bagley through the winter, and then we're going to start looking.
Well, let me know if you're interested in getting another lab, because I found this breeder down in Malacca who is just incredible.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't get one myself, but this is probably the most impressive breeder you're ever going to meet. Whispering Pines, I think, is what he's called. But anyway, so do you get out in muzzleloader too, or is you pretty much just go for the rifle season?
I've got a muzzleloader. I've got actually a crossbow.
Okay.
I had a crossbow permit. Now
now anybody can, I think, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I've harvested a buck during the rifle season, so I'm pretty much done. We've got our homestead is in Wisconsin.
Oh yeah,
back in the 1860s.
Right. Okay.
So harvested a doe down there.
Oh,
so we're
got plenty of meat then.
The harvest is
the fields are white.
Fields are white unto the harvest.
Yeah.
So we're good. We're good for this year.
Good. Do you have any tips for people when they're going out and doing their deer hunting?
I used to be, because where our property is at the Straight and Fish Hook, I used to be all gung ho and had a stand on the north side of the river, and I'd put my waders on and go across and do all this, scent stuff. And I'd pretty much just get up in the stand. No, I'm not a.
Yeah.
I mean, that's for the young guys, or young gals. It's
it's more hardcore.
I just sit up in a deer stand and enjoy the sunrise, and I usually have a book with me, so I'm not a real hardcore hunter.
I know you're a fellow baseball fan.
Oh, huge! Yeah.
Who's your favorite baseball player of all time, and why?
I grew up in the 70s, and Butch Weiniger was the catcher for the Twins.
Yeah.
Butch Weiniger and Rice Molly sadly eventually went on to the Yankees.
Yeah.
But that was sort of my. Those are and there was, of course, when Rod Carew was still with the Twins, and Lyman Bostock and all that. Yeah. Dad took me to my first baseball game in 1975.
Okay.
I did,
Met Stadium?
Yep, Met Stadium. A friend of mine from Walker, he was like, Mark, you're a baseball fan. Mm-hmm. Do you remember when your first game was? And I said, I can't remember. I know the Twins played the Royals. They won. It was 9-8. And Harmon Killebrew in his last season played for the Kansas City Royals.
So he was playing for the Royals in that game?
Yeah, his last season. So he gets on his computer and he says, July 28th, 1970.
Isn't that amazing how you can do that?
And I started to cry.
Yeah.
Because that was my birthday.
Is that right?
So all of a sudden, my dad took me down to the Twin Cities on my birthday for my first baseball game.
What a guy.
Yeah, so I was like 9 years old.
Yeah, you never.
But I never, I knew all these other details, through the fog of memory. And that day in that banker's office, when he found it, it was on your birthday that you went. Yeah.
Cy Young achieved 511 wins in his career. Is there any way that record could ever be broken under any circumstances?
No. Not with pitch counts and and pulling people in the fifth inning and longer bullpens and that. No.
What if people can start pitching into their 60s?
Who knows that?
That's why I say never, because it's kind of a thought experiment to see, like, well, yeah, of course, because if you won 50 games in a season, you'd have to do that for 10 seasons in a row. Yeah. Of course, you probably aren't even going to get 50 starts, let alone 50 wins, because a lot of it's depending on your team. No. But doesn't seem likely. Have you heard about this new potential rule change called like the golden batter or something like that? Have you heard about this?
No.
Well, they're throwing it around out there. They're saying that what they want to do is they want to give teams the opportunity once per game to let anybody on their team bat out of order and come in and be the hero, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
They think that'll generate interest, and that might cause fewer the need for extra innings and all that stuff.
Hey, Zach, I want to go back to pitchers batting.
So you're more of a purist.
Yeah. None of this golden rule stuff.
But the pitch count's been, the pitch timer's been okay, right?
The thing about baseball,
Yeah.
and I totally get it that people wanted to speed up the game, and there's a part of that I like, but I don't know of anybody that says, I want to go spend an afternoon at the ballpark. Well, I shouldn't say. My thought is, well, and let's make that time at the ballpark as short as possible.
Right. Yeah.
I like watching, pitching duels and low scoring ball games that go into extra innings. There doesn't need to be a clock in baseball, in my opinion.
Yeah, it kind of takes away some of the, I guess, mystique of the game or something like that. Even when you remove that, and then of course, if you allowed for that, it would be an assault on the integrity of the record books.
Yeah, the gold matter sure would be.
Yeah.
And A. Bartlett Giamatti, when he was the commissioner, he did
very
some
brief period of time.
Yeah, he did some wonderful writing on baseball. And he said, paradise is a green walled garden. Sounds
Wrigley
like
Field.
Sounds like a baseball park to me.
Yeah.
There it is in Genesis.
There we go. Well, Mark Olson, thank you for coming on the show today and telling us a little bit about your work. And it's exciting, and we wish you all the best success in that, and hope you'll come back again sometime.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate it.
All right. Mark Olson, thank you.
Thank you. Baseball.
Yep.